What happens when your parents leave you behind as a joke? That question haunted me for years, echoing in my mind like a broken record, always coming back when I least expected it. But what I never imagined was that I would be the one asking it. I was only 16, standing alone at a gas station, a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, my family's car disappearing into the distance. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was real. It was abandonment. It started out like any other summer day, a typical road trip with my parents, Gerald and Denise. They thought they were teaching me a lesson in independence. What I didn't know was that this lesson would stay with me for 20 years. A lesson not about growing up, but about the pain of being left behind. That morning we were driving back from visiting my sister, Sabrina, at college. It was a long drive, about 4 hours from home. I was half asleep in the back seat, listening to my iPod, when Dad said something that would change everything. "Go get me a coffee," he barked, his voice cutting through the haze of my tiredness. I didn't think much of it. I took his cash and walked into the gas station, just another mundane stop along the way. When I came back out, the car was gone. At first I thought they'd moved to a different pump, but when I saw their beat-up Camry speeding off down the highway, I felt a chill run down my spine. My parents were gone, and they weren't coming back, not this time. My mom had sent me a text. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem-solving." That little smiley face at the end felt like a slap in the face. I tried calling, over and over again, but each time it went straight to voicemail. 20 minutes later, another text came in. "Don't bother calling. Your father says you need to figure this out yourself. See you when you make it home." That moment, standing there in the blistering summer heat, everything inside me broke. I never thought I'd be telling this story. I never wanted to. But after seeing a TikTok about parents teaching their kids lessons, I felt a rush of emotion that I couldn't ignore. Maybe it's time to finally speak the truth. But trust me, this isn't your typical tough love story. This is a story about survival, about how sometimes the greatest lesson you learn is when you walk away. Everything in my family started with a lesson. My mom, Denise, always had her own way of teaching us about resilience, about not depending on others to solve our problems. Then there was my dad, Gerald. He was the embodiment of strict discipline, no room for weakness. Both of them were what you might call tough love enthusiasts. Love through challenges. There was no place for softness in our family, and all I ever learned was hard lessons. I remember the days when we would gather as a family for simple yet meaningful meals. Despite being far from wealthy and often busy with work, those moments were the most precious to me. Every meal was a reminder of responsibility, of the value of hard work, and of independence. "You have to do everything yourself," my mom would always say, her eyes firm and unwavering, as if every word was a reminder that no one would be there to help you when things got tough. I still vividly recall the Sunday mornings when the whole family would sit down for breakfast together. Mom would make simple meals, toast and scrambled eggs. The sunlight would pour through the window, casting soft beams on the old ceramic plates. Dad would sit at the head of the table, quiet as always, but there was a depth in his eyes, as though every bite he took was a thought about the future. My mom, however, would always look at me, as if she was constantly evaluating how much I had grown. "Do you remember what you did yesterday?" she'd ask, before going on to point out what I had done wrong. That was her way of showing love, even if sometimes it felt more like pressure. Mom would always make me do the chores around the house, and if I did something wrong, she wouldn't say anything. She would just look at me, her eyes cold. Each time that happened, I felt as though I had to make everything perfect. "Do it again, Scott. Don't make me teach you twice," she would say, and I'd redo it until it was flawless. My dad had his own way of teaching, too, though it was far less subtle. Dad's lessons were a bit more direct, more forceful. He believed that every hardship, every struggle, was an opportunity to become stronger. If I forgot to do something, like mow the lawn, I'd get a wake-up call at 3 a.m. "Get up, Scott. The grass isn't going to mow itself," he'd bark. Even though it was 3 a.m., I had to drag myself out of bed and get to work. It wasn't about the lawn. It was about responsibility. It was about learning that life doesn't care about your excuses. It keeps going. One of the most memorable experiences I had with my dad was when I missed the school bus and had to walk 5 miles in the pouring rain. Mom had been headed in that direction anyway, but no, I had to walk. "It'll teach you something," she said, watching me walk away through the window. It wasn't kindness, it was a lesson, and as painful as it was, I understood that this was their way of showing love. Tough love. But nothing could have prepared me for what would come next. The tension, the lessons, the expectations, it all started to build up over time. What felt like love soon turned into something else, something harder to stomach. I started to feel like I was carrying the weight of their lessons on my shoulders, and it was starting to crush me. I was trying so hard to be what they wanted, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the person I was supposed to be. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I could never be enough in their eyes. The day they left me at that gas station, that was the tipping point, the final lesson. And it wasn't just about being independent. It was about surviving. It was about growing up and realizing that sometimes love isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's a test of endurance, and sometimes it can break you. It didn't take long for the full weight of what had just happened to hit me. I stood there, in the middle of that gas station parking lot, staring after my parents' taillights disappearing into the distance. The sun was high, the air thick and stifling. I could feel the sweat clinging to my skin, but it wasn't just the heat. It was the feeling of abandonment that gripped my chest, twisting like a vice. The first text from Mom popped up on my phone as I stared at the empty road ahead. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem solving." The words stung. At that moment, I wasn't sure what hurt more, the heat, the humiliation, or the betrayal. The hot coffee in my hand, which had gone cold in the few minutes I'd been outside, felt like a cruel reminder of how quickly things could change. I had no idea what to do. The only thing that kept me grounded was the fact that I had $140 saved up from my summer job at the pool. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I tried calling my parents, over and over again. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. "Don't bother calling. Your father says you need to figure this out yourself. See you when you make it home." It felt like my world was falling apart in real time. I was alone. I looked around at the empty parking lot, the cracked pavement underfoot, and the old gas pumps that creaked in the heat. This wasn't just a lesson about independence. This was something much more twisted. It was a test of survival. I didn't know what to do next. I knew I couldn't go back. I had $140, but no real plan, no car, no way to get home. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles from any place familiar, with no one to turn to. That's when I noticed the cashier. He was an older guy, clearly overheated from the sun, leaning on the counter, wiping his brow. He looked like he was barely holding it together. I walked up to him, my heart pounding, and asked, "Where's the nearest bus station?" He squinted at me like he didn't understand at first. Then he pointed vaguely in the distance. 2 miles that way," he said, his voice thick with fatigue. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I just need to make a call." I stepped outside and dialed the one person who might help. Aunt Lola. She was Mom's sister, the one they'd stopped talking to years ago. She'd always been different from them. Kinder, softer, more understanding. She'd been the one to buy me a phone when they took mine away, and for that, I knew she was the only person who wouldn't judge me for what had just happened. She picked up on the second ring. "Lola, it's me, Scott." "Scott, what happened? Where are you?" I didn't even try to explain right away. I was shaking, but I forced myself to be calm. "They left me at a gas station. I don't know what to do." "What do you mean, they left you?" "They left. I'm alone. I don't even know where I am." She was quiet for a moment. "Stay right there," she said, her voice firm. "I'm getting you out of there. I'll call you an Uber." I blinked, shocked. This was before the age of Uber, back when people still took taxis, and I'd never imagined Aunt Lola could do something like this for me. But she did. She called a local taxi service to take me to the nearest bus station and bought me a ticket home. "Get to me," she said. "We'll figure it out." I don't know why, but her words felt like a lifeline. Something in me snapped that day. In that moment, I realized just how much of my life had been spent trying to prove something to my parents, to win their approval. But they didn't even care enough to make sure I was okay. I blocked their numbers, turned off my phone, and I didn't look back. The bus ride was long, 6 hours through the back roads of the countryside. The whole time, I kept thinking about what had just happened. How could they have done this to me? The anger was there, but beneath it was a strange feeling, a sense of freedom, of release. Maybe this was my chance to start over. When I finally arrived at Aunt Lola's, she was waiting for me at the station. She hugged me tight, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. I felt like I wasn't just a problem to be fixed. She let me stay with her, helped me get my GED, and then gave me a place to stay when I decided to go after a career. I wasn't just her nephew anymore. I was her family, someone worth supporting. She believed in me, even when my own parents had abandoned me. And in the back of my mind, something had changed. I wasn't just a kid anymore. I wasn't their pawn in a game of life lessons. I was my own person. The boy who'd been left behind at that gas station had been forced to grow up. But I didn't know then that 20 years later, I'd be forced to face them again. Years passed, and life started to unfold in ways I never imagined. Aunt Lola was more than a family member. She was my guiding light, my refuge. She helped me put my life back together, piece by piece. I finished my GED, then got a certification in something that would eventually lead me to build a career. I worked hard, really hard, because for the first time in my life, I was doing something for myself, not to prove anything to anyone else. With each passing year, I grew stronger, more independent, and more certain that I had made the right decision in walking away from my parents. I built a business, a construction company that grew steadily over the years. I met someone, settled down, and had kids of my own. But despite everything, there was always a quiet space inside me that felt like it was missing something. I loved my family, the one I had built with Aunt Lola's help, but I couldn't ignore the void that remained, the void that my parents had left when they drove away that day. The pain didn't go away, it just evolved. It became a part of who I was. I'd learned to live with it, even if it still haunted me from time to time. I'd told myself over and over again that I'd made the right choice, that their lesson had only been a way to manipulate me, to force me to grow in ways they could never understand. But as much as I hated them for it, part of me still yearned for closure, for understanding. Then one morning, it happened. The phone rang. The number on the caller ID wasn't one I recognized, but something in my gut told me I should answer. I didn't. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 2 decades, and I had no intention of starting now. But when I saw 39 missed calls in a matter of hours, my stomach dropped. Most of the calls were from unknown numbers, but there were 3 from Sabrina, my sister. The sister I hadn't spoken to in all those years, the one who in some ways was a part of my past that I couldn't completely sever. The voicemail from Sabrina came first. "Scott, please pick up." Mom and Dad, they found you. They're spiraling. Please call me back. Please. The words hit me harder than I expected. Mom and Dad, they found me. How? Why now? And what did they want from me? I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I sat in my office, my hands gripping my phone tightly, as if by holding it I could somehow control the situation. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step forward or back. Another voicemail came in, this time from Dad. You think you're better than us with all your fancy business? We made you who you are. You owe us. His words were slurred, filled with bitterness, and a part of me couldn't believe what I was hearing. It had been 20 years, and they still thought they had some right to claim credit for my success. Sabrina kept calling. The messages were becoming more desperate, more frantic. Scott, please, they're losing the house. They've gambled away everything. They need money. It wasn't just about the money. I could feel the weight of it, the desperation in her voice, the sense that she was still trapped in the family dynamics that I had escaped so long ago. Sabrina, my little sister, was still in that world. But I wasn't. By the time I finally responded, it wasn't out of any sense of duty or obligation. It was because something inside me was screaming to finally confront this, to end this chapter once and for all. I agreed to meet Sabrina the next morning. She suggested Denny's on 5th Avenue at 7 a.m. Come alone, I texted her back, or don't come at all. The next morning I sat at the booth, my hands wrapped around the cup of coffee the waitress had just brought me. Sabrina walked in, looking exactly like I remembered, just older. Her nervous habit of shredding napkins while she talked hadn't changed. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes red from crying. She didn't waste time. They're losing the house, she blurted, her voice breaking. Dad's been gambling. Mom's maxed out her credit cards. They found your company's website. They want $50,000 to avoid foreclosure. The words were a punch to the gut, but I had to stay calm. My business had grown, yes, but I wasn't a bank. I couldn't fix everything, no matter how much they wanted me to. I'd worked my entire life to get where I was, and no one had handed me anything, certainly not my parents. I looked at Sabrina, and I saw the same girl I used to protect, the one who always begged me to help her get through the tough times. But this was different. She wasn't asking for help. She was pleading for me to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. Why help them, Sabrina? I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm swirling inside me. After everything they did? Her eyes filled with tears, and she cried. They're still our parents, she whispered, almost as if to convince herself. I couldn't bring myself to forgive them. Not after everything they had done, not after the joke they played on me when I was a kid, leaving me stranded at that gas station. No, I said, my voice firm. They stopped being my parents at that gas station. I could see the heartbreak in Sabrina's eyes, but I wasn't going to be her solution. I wasn't going to fix their mistakes. I couldn't be the one to save them anymore. I'm paying for breakfast, I said, cutting the conversation short. Block my number after this. Don't contact me again about them. I paid the bill and walked out, not looking back. But as I got into my truck, Sabrina's voice echoed in my mind. She ran after me, shouting that they were coming to my office the next morning. Mom found the address, she said. They're coming. I nodded, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. I was ready. The morning they showed up at my office, I was ready. It had been 20 years since I last laid eyes on my parents. But when I saw their faces through the glass, I felt the years of anger, hurt, and resentment rush to the surface. They looked older, worn down. My father's mustache had turned gray, and my mother's blonde hair didn't hide the deep wrinkles around her eyes anymore. They were dressed in their Sunday best, as if a suit could erase the years of damage they'd caused. Mom burst through the door, tears streaming down her face. My baby boy. Look at you, all grown up. She reached for me, trying to pull me into a hug, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. I wasn't the same kid who had been left alone at that gas station. I wasn't the same person who had quietly suffered in silence for all those years. The boy they had tried to break was gone, replaced by someone who had fought for everything he had. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't include them. "Let's keep this professional," I said coldly, gesturing toward the chairs. "What do you want?" Dad puffed up like he always did when he was about to preach. "Son, is that any way to talk to your mother? After all these years, this is how you greet us?" He sounded more like a man trying to defend his own pride than a father seeking redemption. I couldn't stay silent. "You didn't spend 20 years looking for me because you missed me. You found me because you need something." His face darkened, and Mom's sobs only grew louder. They had come for something? Money. That was what this was really about. They needed $175,000 to save their house from foreclosure. It was all about their desperation, their failure, and I was supposed to bail them out. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. They had spent years teaching me that everything in life came with a price, that love was conditional. They had treated me as a tool for their own purposes. I wasn't about to let them use me again. When they finally stopped begging, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. The silence that followed was deafening. "Funny you should mention the house," I said, my voice steady. "When I heard you were looking for me, I did some digging. I found out about the foreclosure." I watched their expressions change as the words sank in. Their confusion turned to shock, then fear. "What does that mean?" Dad's voice was small now, no longer filled with the usual bravado. "It means," I said, my heart pounding, "you have 30 days to vacate. My company bought your mortgage debt at auction last week. We're demolishing the house for a new development." Mom's wails grew louder, and Dad's face turned a deep shade of purple. They both started shouting, pleading, but I had no sympathy left for them, not anymore. The security team arrived just in time to escort them out of the building. I stood there, watching them struggle against the guards, but my emotions had already hardened. I had been raised to believe that blood was everything. But standing in that moment, I realized the truth. Family doesn't always mean love, and love doesn't always mean sacrifice. As they were dragged out, I couldn't help but think about the lessons I had learned over the years. The lesson from my parents had been clear. Survival depended on doing whatever it took to get ahead. But as I watched them leave, I realized that the lesson I had learned from Aunt Lola was far more powerful. The lesson that family should be about support, not manipulation. That love isn't just a tool to teach lessons. It's something to be given freely, without expectation. When they left, I was left alone with my thoughts. I realized how much I had changed. The kid who had been abandoned in that parking lot wasn't the same person who had just kicked his parents out of his life. I had learned something far deeper than any lesson they had tried to teach me. I had learned to stand up for myself, to break free from the chains they had tried to wrap around me. That's when it hit me, the moment of clarity. Family doesn't always give you what you expect. Sometimes, the people you love the most will hurt you. They'll teach you lessons, but not all lessons are worth learning. Some lessons are about strength, and others are about letting go. I had spent so many years trying to understand why they had done what they did, why they had treated me the way they had. But now, standing in my office, I knew that the real lesson wasn't about them. It was about me. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had found my own way in this world, and I would never let their mistakes define me again. The days that followed were quiet. The demolition of my parents' house went ahead as planned. I watched from a distance, sitting in my truck, as the bulldozers tore through the place that had once been my home. The garden where Mom spent hours tending her roses, the driveway where Dad taught me to change my first tire. All of it was destroyed in a matter of hours. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, a relief that I hadn't expected. For so many years I had imagined this moment, filled with anger, regret, and revenge. But when it actually happened, there was only peace. I thought about how much of my life I had spent angry, hurt, and searching for something I could never find. Love from parents who couldn't offer it in the way I needed. But in the end, the real lesson wasn't in the destruction of their house, or even in their begging. It was in what I had built for myself. I had learned to create something real, something lasting, from the very rubble they left behind. The new development was already in the works, affordable housing for families who needed a fresh start. I named it Annabelle Haven, after Aunt Lola, the woman who had given me the love and support I had been deprived of for so long. It felt fitting that the place I had built with my own hands would be named after the woman who had taught me that family wasn't about blood. It was about the people who choose to be there for you. I stood there, watching the final piece of my parents' past crumble to the ground. I thought of Sabrina, the sister I had once tried to protect, and how she was still entangled in their web. I hadn't heard from her in days, but I knew she was out there, struggling with the same choices I had faced all those years ago. Part of me wanted to reach out, to help her, but I knew that some lessons had to be learned the hard way. As the last of the debris was cleared, I took a deep breath and looked at the land where their house once stood. I had reclaimed this space, not just physically, but emotionally. I had severed the chains they had tried to bind me with, and I was finally free. Sometimes the hardest thing is to let go, I whispered to myself. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything they had taken from me, and everything I had given myself in return. I walked away from the site, and for the first time in my life I felt truly at peace. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had learned to live for myself. And as I looked up at the sky, I realized that sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that come when we least expect them, the ones that teach us to forgive ourselves, to walk away from the past, and to embrace the future. So what about you? Have you ever had to let go of something or someone to find your own peace? Have you ever had to make the hardest choice, even when it meant walking away from the people you once loved most? The story isn't just mine, it's everyone's, and maybe, just maybe, it's time we all start writing our own endings.